Hi, I'm Kimihiro Tsuzimski, and I apologize for what may be seen as a little bit of a drop in production quality. I'm up in the high mountain desert of the Sierra Cedar Mountains in Arizona, and well, let's just say that I'm really glad I have a mobile hotspot because this would be even rougher with a satellite transmission. Here is our second video on the subject overall of interdependence, but specifically on the difference between complexity and complications. Complex or complicated. You know, a lot of people use the words as if they mean the exact same thing, but they really don't. This isn't a grammar lesson, so honestly, I'm not sure I even care how you use the words. Here's what's important to me. As project leaders, you need to understand the difference in what they truly mean. And so I've been thinking, what is a great example that I could give you? What is a really powerful example that I could give you? And then during the course of every morning, I give a few minutes to the New York Times headlines, and I give a few minutes to Huffington Post, just because actually, I'm not sure why. And I give a few minutes to the Telegraph. Now, every once in a while, I'll also pick up a newspaper from Asia. And there it was in the Telegraph. The headline read, "We're watching one of the most spectacular technology implosions of all time." Well, if that isn't an invitation to read it, I don't know what is. And when I was done, I realized it's also a great example of complex versus complicated. You see, the main danger for project leaders is that we don't always realize that we have taken for granted that whatever problem it is that we're trying to help our organizations or our clients solve is complicated. Therein lies the risk. You see, complicated insinuates that, well, there aren't a whole lot of unknowns. It's not simple. It's not straightforward. You know, there are lots of moving parts. However, ultimately, we know pretty much everything we need to know in order to solve this problem. The reality is, more and more, especially as we become so much more of a global village, those problems aren't complicated at all. They're complex. The amount of things that we don't know can trip us up for the simple reason that it doesn't occur to us that we don't know. Case in point, let me scroll down to find this exact quote. It's about when Microsoft added ChatGPT to its Bing search web engine. And Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, even indulged in a little public goading. I want people to know that we made Google dance. And I think that'll be a great day. Little bit premature. The article in the Telegraph, who, by the way, was written by Andrew Orlowski, goes on to point out that Bing Chat began to hallucinate. It assured us that we could safely eat ground glass, that 4 US presidents had been women, and then it would invent citations and immediately deny an answer that it had just given you as true as being true. Now, things got even worse because Bing Chat started to throw tantrums. Now, I'll admit, I'm right there with them. It never would have occurred to me that a chatbot would throw a temper tantrum. Never mind start threatening its users. But it turns out that one of the real reasons for this is because there was a certain lack of understanding about what we don't know. Now, in Think Again, Adam Grant points out the value of being willing to look at what we don't know. Not just what we do know, but what we don't know. And being able to face the certainty that there is almost always in these days and times something that we don't know. And that's okay. And there is the issue. According to Grant, what really makes our decision-making dicey is when we're not willing to be okay with the fact that we don't know everything. Can you see why understanding the difference between complex and complicated becomes so important? You see, if you look at everything thinking, it's just complicated, but we got this, without giving yourself room to then absorb additional information, process that different information and say, maybe we need to move this thing a little bit further here, or maybe we need to move this thing a little bit further here. Because based on new information, we now have a different understanding of what the situation is, what the problem is, or of what the salient facts might be. So while I admit it was kind of fun reading Orlowski's article about how Microsoft jumped the gun a little bit on its public shaming, if you will, goading, it was also kind of sad because a lot of these algorithms and a lot of these applications run things in the background that we may not always be aware of. And that's our version of the difference between complex and complicated. As consumers and users of technology, it can get a little bit complicated when it's really a little more complex. When we don't understand what the real implications are of turning over the drive to research, the understanding of the entire problem to an algorithm. I started out in IT. I started out in one of the biggest computer networks in the world. It was called AT&T. And every single person that I know of has sometime in their past come to an interesting realization. The technology, the context in which we use the technology has all changed from when we first learned that technology. And hopefully that understanding keeps us, well, Adam Grant calls it humble curiosity. It means that we understand we don't know everything and we're willing to admit it. And we're also willing to go chase it down to see what we need to learn, what we need to know. So I'm kind of wondering, perhaps the next time that Microsoft decides to slap on a chatbot that they've invented, interacting with an algorithm that they did not, they might think about whether or not they want to advise people that it's perfectly okay to eat ground glass, because it's a little more complex than that. And understanding the implications of underestimating the complexity of a situation Well, that's actually not complicated at all. We're talking about interdependencies, and this first lesson is about the difference between complex and complicated, in part because understanding interdependencies has to start with understanding that they exist, and sometimes in the most surprising of places. This lesson was brought to you by the Leadership Driven Project Management Academy. I'm Kimi Hirotsuzumiski. Thanks for joining us.